recent one titled The Formation of a Regional Religious System in Greater China will be published by Lineages in 2022. Let's welcome Dr. Jiang Wu to present his lecture titled Pei Xiu and the Fellowship of Dao-learners in Medieval Chan History. Dr. Wu, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Guo, Miraj, Jen. Thank you very much for your kind introduction and hosting this great event. So I'm very glad to be here, to be with old friends, with community of University of the West. And I have seen many familiar faces, and I hope today I can bring something new to you. And here, let me share my screen. If you can see here, let me just start the slideshow here. As you can see, on my screen, I have my title and also a picture of the person I want to introduce. By the way, I want to explain a little bit why I choose this topic. Professor Guo already introduced, I do studies on Buddhist canon, for example, Chan history, of course, but mostly much later periods in the Ming and Qing dynasty. But today I chose this topic to talk about. Actually, I feel obligated to talk about this person because this brings back a long time ago the memory when I was a graduate student, actually, as all other graduate students, if you study Chinese Buddhism, you start with Tang Buddhism, right? So I start with Tang Dynasty Buddhism as well. At that time, not so many people work on much later periods. So I was one of the person who just kind of choose to work much later time. But I started with Tang Dynasty Buddhism. Pei Xiu is one of the literati followers of much more famous Chan masters. Here I'm talking about Zongmi, right? Huangbo Xiyun. For those who are students of Chinese Buddhism, these names are much more famous, but probably not about Pei Xiu. So I worked on Pei Xiu for a while, but later just give it up. But to my surprise, I actually, after almost 20 years, right, no English literature, anything written in English about Pei Xiu, right? So I thought, what's going on? I thought this person is hugely interesting, but nobody actually worked on that, right? Actually, I put out my paper. I wrote a paper a long time ago, and right now I revise it. It's going to be published in the next issue of Journal of Chan History, right? Edited by Professor Jinhua Chen and George Kavers. So it's coming out from University of British Columbia. And so I do have a paper in my hand, right? So this morning, actually, I'm still copy editing this paper. So you're going to have a written version of this talk. But of course, I'm not going to read my paper. It's so boring. The early draft is about 100 pages. Later, I cut it off, mostly about the Dao-learner part, right? You see here, obviously, I've put lots of content into this paper. And that becomes really big and huge. So in this talk, I'm going to introduce primarily this person, right, called Pei Xiu, who he is. And probably less about the second part, right? I will save it for another occasion. But I hopefully in the next 40 minutes, I will introduce kind of my favorite literati follower of Buddhism, right? See if you like him or not, right? So just some usual topics, right? When you introduce a person here, we want to know who he is, right? Who is him? Of course, we have his official biographies in dynastic histories. Well, we actually know him pretty well. At one time, he was the Grand Chancellor. You can call him Prime Minister in the Tang Dynasty, probably in the 8th, 9th century, in the later Tang, right? So he was famous. But however, he was also a pious Buddhist. That makes him somehow famous among localized regional kind of Buddhist communities. So there are more legends developed about him. So those legends are really interesting. During the research, I found lots of interesting anecdotes actually about him, right? So that makes him interesting. And then I'm going to introduce his works, right? Exactly what he's writing, right? Fortunately, we have something available, although not much, but I think it's enough for us to reconstruct his thought, right? By the way, I want to emphasize this talk is about the student, a follower, not about their teachers. I mentioned Zongmi and Huangbo Xiyun. These are much more famous, and there are monographs, articles devoted to these two figures. So I don't want to kind of spend time kind of regurgitating some of the research here, but my focus actually is on students, or I tend to call them Dao-learners, right? Xuedaoren, right? Sorry for this kind of a neologism, right? So this is very awkward English, but I can't find other kind of a more appropriate category to describe Pei Xiu and people similar to him, right? Basically, what he represents is more like how to say that, advanced beginners, right? Advanced spiritual seekers, right? So somehow resonated with today's world, right? We all pursue way, the Tao, right? So these group of people, not masters, right, haven't attained a very high level of enlightenment, let's say, but however, they constitute a huge body of followers or students, right? So that's the purpose of this talk. Of course, I'm going to introduce his relationship with Chan masters. Two of them I mentioned already frequently, Huangbo Xiyun and Zongmi, right? And also, I want to evaluate his role in medieval Chan history, really in the Chan Buddhism, including Chan historiographies, how people, Chan historians, right, look at Pei Xiu and try to make him more like a radical Chan person, right? And lastly, if I have time, I'm going to talk a little bit about this hypothesis, right? My hypothesis is that it's not him alone, right? Actually, there are many more people like him, right? I tend to call him Dao-learner, Xuedaoren. By the way, this term is not my creation, right? I'm going to point it out, like Huangbo Xiyun, by the way, 传心法要, that's the one of the major work actually composed by Pei Xiu, in which we can find many references to this kind of a Dao-learners, right? So that's today's talk, my plan here, right? Okay, so first of all, let me introduce who he is, right? His life, right? So his surname is Pei, right? If you belong to a Pei family, congratulations, right? This is one of the most successful lineage in China, right? Very prominent. From Shanxi province, I heard Professor Guo actually hailed from that area as well, right? So this is Wenxi in today's Shanxi province, and this Pei family can be dated really to the early Han dynasty, and later they divided into three branches: West, Central, Eastern, right? And the lineage kept producing high-ranking officials, including, for example, prime ministers, grand chancellor, for example, I mentioned. So they have according to a statistic, by the way, they have a family genealogies. So it's not difficult to count how many people got the 进士 degree, for example, become prime ministers. They're 59, right? Think about a lineage, right? A family, clan, right? So they actually have 59 grand counselors in Chinese history, mostly Tang dynasties, Sui and Song. Right? So that's his life, and which makes him very prominent. Right? About his himself, right here, let's look at the official dynastic history. Of course, he was introduced as a capable bureaucrat, official prime minister, but however, there's one paragraph actually introduced his Buddhist connection, right? So I copy paste from my paper here. So you can see here, he was good at the literary arts, right? Just like all the other literati followers, they excel at the letter writing, form his own unique style in the art of calligraphy. By the way, Pei Xiu was really a great calligrapher. The Robin's inscriptions are still preserved And we can see his calligraphical style is really much more appreciated among the fans. Right? And his family had generations embracing Buddhism. Pei Xiu was even deeper in Buddhist books. Right? Here is another point I want to emphasize here. Pei Xiu represent a kind of a Buddhist, they favor learning, right? Learning through books. Right? So Taiyuan and the Fengxiang, right? These are in Shanxi, Shanxi, are near the famous mountains where many Buddhist monasteries. On the pretext of sightseeing, he would wander on walks through mountains and the forest, carry on the discussion with Buddhist monks, learned in Buddhist doctrinal systems in search of the principle of Buddhism. After his middle years, he did not eat garlic, onion, meat, always observing precepts of vegetarianism. Right? Putting it in short, he was really a pious Buddhist, loved Buddhist books, discussion with eminent monks. Right? So that's him. So that got into the dynastic history, and he was famous for that. Right? The last sentence in the dynastic history is really interesting. It says what? Many told stories ridiculing him, right? So he was, how to say that, popular figure, probably not that popular because they're really negative images, stories about him, anecdotes, let's say anecdotes. Later I'm going to show you some of the interesting ones, right? But however, he did not consider these comments offensive, right? He kind of accepted those, right? Okay, so let's look at the, for example, the anecdotes. What are those anecdotes, right? For example, in this one of the earliest Chan anthology we call Zu Tangji, the Patriarch's Hall collection. So we have in Huangbo Xiyun, under Huangbo Xiyun. I already mentioned he had really close ties with Huangbo Xiyun, right? In this early Chan collection of biographies of Chan masters and the Huangbo Xiyun, we have this interesting kind of an episode, right, about Pei Xiu, right? Here I took it as Pei Xiu, right? No other than Pei Xiu here. It's because he was the grand counselor here. And here we have the translation. What it says one day, right? Mr. Pei fell slightly unwell, and not long after he died. Here, basically he passed into unconsciousness, right? Not really died, but he has this near-death experience, right? Huangbo Xiyun happened to be around, right? And Mr. Pei woke up after a while, right? And then he started to relate his experience in this darkness, which is unconsciousness. And he said, when I enter the realm of darkness, I had legs which had never walked, right? He was traveling, but not using his legs. I had eyes which had never seen, right? Having walked for 40, 50 miles, right? Of course, not using legs. After having been tired, suddenly I saw a pond. I wished to enter the pond. And there was an old monk, so that is Huangbo Xiyun, didn't let him to do that, right? So then he woke up, right? And Huangbo Xiyun said, okay, you're so lucky, right, to see me. Otherwise, you're going to die, right? You're going to see the Dragon King, right? Which means you're not going to come back, right? So that becomes one of the anecdotes in Chan history, in early Chan history, right? There's something else, mostly in the Song dynasty. By the way, lots of anecdotes actually passed on to the Song dynasty, miscellaneous notes, for example, right? And they all said Pei Xiu was a pious Buddhist. There are stories like this one in Beimeng Suoyan in the 10th century in the Northern Song. It says Pei Xiu was actually reborn as the son of a Khotanese king, right, Yu Tian. So because Pei Xiu was famous for protecting Buddhism, the legend says that this song, in his palm, this newborn baby, in his palm, there's two Chinese characters there. It says Pei Xiu, right? So the legend says that actually people want to get this song back to China, but the Song dynasty emperor won't allow that, right? So this is really extraordinary anecdotes, right? Shows the influence of Pei Xiu going beyond just the literati circle, bureaucracy, but enter into the popular consciousness, right? So that seems to be very interesting, right? So this is another anecdote I want to show you. It's from a Northern Song scholar called Zhang Bangji, right? So this is called Extensive Records of an Ink Essay called 墨庄漫录, right? So it says a examination candidate, right, from Mingzhou, who is Ningbo, he wants to go to the capital Kaifeng at that time in the Northern Song, right, to take exam, but he was carried away by a storm. So he landed in an island, right, where he saw the inhabitants all there, about 300, right? They have a leader. This leader is Pei Xiu, right? This leader is Pei Xiu, right? What they said is that they moved to this island after the Tang dynasty, right? They have been living here for more than 100 years, but everybody is still human being, right? There's nobody died, right? More like immortals. So Pei Xiu was the leader. And Pei Xiu received this guy, right, this examination candidate, and say, okay, great, you want to stay. But however, he recognized this guy has too much secular, mundane desires, right, not suitable living here. So he said, go back. But however, read Surangama Sutra, right, Leng Yanjing, read Surangama Sutra. So the man returned, but he found that actually so many years passed by, right? Nobody recognized him. His wife died, right? So he really regretted coming back. He thought he should stay with Pei Xiu, right? But however, no way he can go back. So basically he died of insanity. So this is another story, right? So I want to show that just that how popular Pei Xiu is, but none other legend stories famous than the white snake legends. So we all know the white snake, but however, in the popular folklore, this has to do with Pei Xiu as well. Why is that? Everybody remembers the evil monk or the powerful monk called Fa Hai. According to the legend, actually, this Fa Hai was Pei Xiu's son, right? Pei Xiu has several sons. One of them, Pei Xiu encouraged him to become a monk. So this monk, according to a legend, circulated in the Hangzhou area, was exactly Fa Hai, right? So then that becomes really interesting, right? But this talk is really not about the legends or much later period, right? I just want to show you how influential, right, this person is, right? Not just for the Buddhist reason, but however, for lots of reasons. It seems to be there's a follower, right? But my point is that as a student, somehow he's not a simple follower of more famous teachers like Zongmi and Huangbo Xiyun, but he himself, right, becomes a leader in the popular consciousness, right? The reason, I don't know why. I pointed out this Northern Song or Song dynasty is very important, but I don't know what happens, right? And let's look at his works, right? What he has written, right? So something really we have to talk about is this, number one, individual kind of a essay which has been preserved, or an essay exhorting the generation of Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva is Puti Xin, right? So this is a crucial concept in Chinese Buddhism. 劝发菩提心文, right? So this is the title. I usually call that the Bodhisattva essay, just for the sake of brevity. And by the way, if you know Chinese history or kind of this title, there's another similar piece with the same title actually appeared much later in the Hangzhou area by this Pure Land teacher called Xing An, right? So that one is more famous in Chinese communities. So that one also has the title 劝发菩提心文, but they're not related, right? Nothing related. The truth is that after Song Dynasty, Pei Xiu's work, this one, right? This one's completely disappeared, right? So the modern edition in Buddhist canon actually was retrieved from Japan, right? This somehow got preserved in Japan. I have a note here on my screen. You see the Kozanji. So this is Japanese temple. The founder is Mue, right? Mue in the 20th century, in the 12th century, he received a copy from Hangzhou. That's exactly this text. So he preserved this text in Japan. So there are multiple manuscripts discovered in Japan. So that got into the current Buddhist canon, right? But however, we haven't found anything about this text in China after Song Dynasty. There are quotations of the text, but there's no evidence the text in its entirety has been preserved in China, right? So we're talking about the kind of a broken history, right? So this one was popular in China, probably in Tang and Song, but not in the later time. Popular in Japan, of course, right? We have multiple manuscripts, but also strangely in Tanggud as well, right? If you don't know what Tanggud, that's Xixia, the Western Xia. This is Song Dynasty. What is so interesting, because nowadays we know much more about the Tanggud texts. Many were discovered, scholars doing research. Very interestingly, people find the Tanggud version of this text. Right now, it was translated back into Chinese. Right. The reason is that Huayan was popular in North China, in South China as well, by the way. But however, Pei Xiu, together with Zongmi, right, somehow got into Tanggud Buddhism, right? So that's why his text was this text, right? I'm talking about this Bodhisattva essay was preserved in Tanggud language in its entirety, right? Also, fortunately, we have English translation, right? If you know BQ Dhamma-mitra, right, he translated actually this text, entire text, into English. So it's possible to consult his translation. And also, I mentioned already the Tanggud edition, right? In Tanggud edition, actually, there's a very dubious title called Collection of Encounters of Chan Master Pei Xiu. It's very interesting. For some reason, Pei Xiu has been regarded as Chan Master. We know he's a layperson, never become a monk, right? So this is about the Bodhisattva essay, right? If you want to know what it is, it's not long, by the way. It's not long. And also, let me say a couple of words about what this essay is about. It's not purely his creation, right? But however, an anthology of his reading notes, right? More like his reading notes. He put all relevant contents together. Right? So basically, it's an anthology. It's an anthology. So if you look at the title I listed here, is about 14 of them, and it's listed according to these categories. And then you can find the excerpts from Buddhist scriptures, right, related to that topic, right? For example, in the beginning, expounding the term meaning of body, right, enlightenment. And then substance of bodhisattva, right, because this essay is about bodhisattva, 3 types of mind, 5 vows, right, and constantly upholding bodhisattva, deliver all sentient beings to salvation, accumulated blessings and merits, cultivation, study Bodhidharma, Buddha Dhamma, serving person all Buddhas with good teachers, cultivating solely for Buddhist fruit, sustain ties with enlightened clergy members and the laity, penetrate all scriptures of the perfect and the sudden teaching, all Bodhi-assisted methods, right? And the 4 methods of Bodhisattva indulgence, 4 methods of Bodhisattva's fast, and the quick attainment, and also the merit arousing the Bodhisattva, right? And the last one is resolving the doubts regarding difference between mundane and holy, right? So if you look at this and compare the essay of a similar title, I mentioned there's a Pure Land writing similar to this, quite different, right? So this one, as far as I read it, emphasized learning, right? So later I'm going to talk more about that. And also learning through reading scriptures, accumulate merit in that way. So there's lots of entries, categories related to that. Right? So this is about his essay, not long, right? So he was remembered actually as the editor or compiler of this much more famous Buddhist text. We call it Essentials of Transmission of the Mind, 传心法要, right? So this one got translated into English even much earlier by John Blofeld. So we have the 50s translation and later updated by John McRae. And in the BDK translation, by the way, John McRae's translation only covers 传心法要, right? Not 万灵路. So there are actually 2 parts, right? 万灵路 is somehow separate, but usually we group them together, right? So these texts are all available for us to study. And Pei Xiu, by the way, he wrote a preface of this work, indicating that that's out of his own hand, right, by compiling, editing. But the sayings are actually recording Huangbo Xiyun's sayings, kind of instructions, right, to Pei Xiu, right. So I think we can use that as a way to reconstruct Pei Xiu, right? I said the talk is about the student, right? Not really about the masters. So that's about Pei Xiu. And then I want to turn to this topic about his connections with the two masters. But before that, I want to just point it out. He had many other connections, other monks he favored, because he wrote, for example, inscriptions, epitaphs for those monks. I have a list here. In addition to Pei Xiu, Zongmi and Huangbo Xiyun, the next most important one probably is the number 3, right? Guishan Lingyu, right? Lingyu, right? He also had a very close connection with him, right? But today I'm not going to have time to talk more about that. So just bear in mind, he has much more kind of wider connections with lots of the figures, right? Okay, so then let's look at this one, right? Pei Xiu and the Zongmi, one by one, just 2 of them today I want to kind of talk about. And Pei Xiu, Zongmi, right? So they met each other, right? Probably in the year 828, right? When Pei Xiu was a young man, Pei Xiu was he passed exams and was kind of selected in the recommendation category, because the Pei family, here we're talking about, you know, the prominent hereditary aristocracy here in Tang Dynasty. Usually the position got inherited, right, within the same lineage group. So he was selected, and he knew Zongmi because Zongmi was invited to the palace, right, to give talks. Then they immediately became good friends. And after that, lots of the Zongmi's work, right? Pei Xiu participated in the creation of those works by writing the preface, right? Basically introduced the essays, the writings Zongmi did, right? And by the way, these writings are highly kind of sophisticated. It's not just a kind of a thank you very much, I like your work, that kind of a preface, but he really go deep, right? Later I'm going to show some of the preface that shows the profound thought by Pei Xiu, right? So then they after Zongmi died, by the way, Zongmi died much earlier in 841, and Pei Xiu actually wrote a inscription for him, right? Very passionate, lots of details. If you don't know this person well, you cannot write something like that. And so I just want to try to show their connections, really strong, really close. And Pei Xiu, he said these words at the end of this slide. I have a quotation here. He said something very passionate. You can see how he described his relationship with Zongmi, right? So what their relationship is what? Like they were brothers in terms of Buddhist teaching. They were friends by virtue of righteousness. They were spiritual beneficiaries out of kindness, and they were internal, external Dharma protectors, right? So this is somehow really kind of intimate relationship, right? With Huangbo Xiyun, right? So the year after Zongmi died, actually, he got to know Huangbo Xiyun, right? So by the way, Pei Xiu's official career, right? He served in the central government, but also he was appointed as a governor, prefect, commissioners in different kind of areas, regions. So that he got to travel. So one place he went most is Jiangxi, right? So Huangbo Xiyun was there. So he met there, he heard about Huangbo Xiyun, Baizhang Huaihai, Mazu Daoyi, this lineage. So he got to know Huangbo Xiyun, right? By the way, I just want to put a footnote here. Where Huangbo Xiyun came from, this came from Fujian, right? He was the person from Fujian, the place called Fuqing. Actually, he was ordained in the local monastery mountain called Huangbo, right? So later he went to Jiangxi, he named the mountain in Jiangxi as Huangbo, right? So actually it's not, the Huangbo mountain in Jiangxi was adopted from Fujian, right? Why I want to mention this, because this becomes really famous in Japan. In Japan, something called Obaku, which is located in Kyoto, right? Founded by a monk coming from this monastery in Ming and Qing dynasty called Yiyuan Rongqi, right? I wrote a book for this monk, so I just want to point out the connection here. And of course, they're not directly related, right? One is very early, Xiyun is much earlier, but Yiyuan Rongqi was much later, right? But they made the name of Huangbo, right, very famous in East Asia, right? East Asia. So that's Pei Xiu. Pei Xiu actually was prefect in two places, Zhongling, right, Nanchang, Jiangxi, and Wanling. This is more like Anhui. So he was prefect there, and he invited Huangbo Xiyun to the monasteries in the city. By the way, Kaiyuan Monastery, right, and Longxing monasteries. These are all the official Tang Dynasty temples, right? So this is more like a government temples. So Huangbo Xiyun was invited here. Pei Xiu was such a good student. He took down the notes. He took down notes what Huangbo Xiyun said to him and put together. Right. Later, I'm going to show you the preface. He said very clearly, he put them together, sent it back to the monastery. People added that, and then it got published. And so that's the his relationship with Huangbo Xiyun, right? So that raises a very interesting question, because we know Zongmi and Huangbo Xiyun are two very, very different teachers. By the way, they're both Chan teachers, right? But one is focused more on the synthesis of Chan Buddhism, mostly from Shenhui, right? And the doctrinal studies, right, which is Huayan Buddhism, right? So Zongmi did that very well, right, successfully. But however, we see here, Pei Xiu went to Huangbo Xiyun later, but Huangbo Xiyun represent a kind of a radical type of a Chan Buddhism, right? So these two theoretically, ideally, are not going to come together, but looks like Pei Xiu, right, represent the connections with both. Then, very interestingly, such as in Jingde Chuandeng Lu, which is one of the Orthodox Chan genealogy, actually try to describe Pei Xiu as a follower. There's a conversion, right? Conversion from a more kind of a comprehensive type of Chan Buddhism, right? A doctrinal Chan synthesis to a more radical type of Chan Buddhism, which is represented by Huangbo Xiyun, right? For example, in Jingde Chuandeng Lu, it says, although, right, Zongmi was well versed in both Chan and doctrinal studies and revered by Pei Xiu, he was not comparable to Xiyun, right? Because Xiyun represents the highest transcendental type of Chan. And then Pei Xiu later set mind, right? Converted, right? Wholeheartedly believed. So that somehow the Chan historiography created a certain kind of images, right, for Pei Xiu as a follower of a more radical Chan Buddhism, right? Okay, so that's his relationship with the two masters, right? So let's focus on Pei Xiu, right? I just want to focus on Pei Xiu. What exactly in his mind, right? The characteristics of this kind of students, right? Beginners, right? Much more advanced, of course. So number one, I don't have the details to talk about that. I mentioned I have a paper, right? So later maybe you can read my paper, right? So here just outlines. First, he emphasized the practical dimension, just like all students, they want to apply the doctrinal issues, studies to their daily life, right? So we see that. And advocating Bodhisattva, of course, right? Bodhisattva is one of the most essential concept category during the Tang time, not Huayan teaching, but also esoteric teaching, for example, right? So these are all kind of very, very prominent in Mahayana literature, right? So Pei Xiu is favoring that. So, and also put all together, I mentioned this, he emphasized learning, right? So learning, or more specifically through books, handling books. So in my much longer paper, I emphasize reading, writing, right? Commentating, right? All these are very kind of a profound techniques. So these are techniques of learning, right? So Pei Xiu used that very well. Right? We don't have time to look at that, right? And as I said, he emphasized on learning. One thing I noticed in his preface, for example, right? I want to read the preface more closely, right? The content is by the masters, but here he really emphasized this relationships between commentaries and the scriptures and the contemplations, right? In his view, these three should come together, right? Each one has its own function, right? He had a long quotation. I don't want to quote here. It's very long, but I have this diagram. So if you look at this diagram, you're going to understand, right? So exactly what his vision of the relationship, right? So this is coming from his preface to Zongmi's commentary on Du Shun's work, right? Called Gate of Contemplation on the Huayan Dhamma Dhatu, right? Zhu Fa Jie, Huayan Fa Jie, Guan Men, right? So there are Guan here, contemplation, there are commentary, that's Zhu, right? Zongmi's Zhu, right? And there are scriptures, of course, the Huayan scriptures, Avantam Saga. So we have a complicated relationship. Exactly which one is more important, which one we should focus on. He said that so clearly. So far I have seen the most kind of the clearest kind of depiction, explanation about their relationships, right? So he has a metaphor here, right? He if you look at his longer version of his essay, he said, okay, just like going to the capital city, if you want to tour the city, have a look, right? You need to get a map. Here, that's an illustrated guide called Tujing, right? Supposedly there are two, right? There are illustrations, maps, right? And also texts. You want to use that to understand the city, but it is very abstract, right? It is very abstract, right? So that's scripture, right? But however, the purpose is actually to ascend high terrace, right? And look around. That's contemplation, right? You want to go up higher to be able to see palaces, for example, to have an overview, bird-eye view of the capital. So then you need to go up, right? But how to go up, you actually need the key to the gate, right? The gate leading towards the high terrace, right? So that's the relationship and the metaphors he used to kind of explain the relationship, right? So basically you need the key, which is commentaries, right? You need to start with commentaries. Then you get to the scripture, but scripture is not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to develop this contemplation, right? Then you can comprehend the Dhamma Dhatu, right? Which is Fa Jie, right? That's more like a capital city. So that's the relationship. I think it's well done, right? I think Zongmi, Pei Xiu did that well. But according to Pei Xiu, Zongmi told him that, right? But I haven't found Zongmi in Zongmi's writing, right? Zongmi said about that. Right? But anyway, let's go back. Pei Xiu as a Chan follower, right? So here we're really having a problem here, because if we believe in Jingde Chuandeng Lu, he was converted, right? It looks like that's a perfect ending, because Pei Xiu died, Zongmi died, right? So he has a new master called Huangbo Xiyun, right? But it's not that simple, right? So he was problematic because in his own word, this quotation on this page is coming from his preface to Chuanxin Fa Yao, right? So that's for Huangbo Xiyun. He actually praised Huangbo Xiyun, right, as the person with the most supreme transcendental Dhamma seal, right? This is more like Huangbo Xiyun is number one, right? It's better than anybody else, right? So if you take that literally, you probably think, that's the evidence for conversion, right? But probably not that much, because we have seen Pei Xiu wrote a lot about learning, right? And also he was remembered as that in Huayan communities, right? In those legends, right? So this is about him. Huangbo Xiyun actually, right? If you read that carefully, here I'm reading that, try to figure out who is Pei Xiu, because he addressed his remarks to Pei Xiu, right? So actually, my sense of Huangbo Xiyun is that he was actually very critical to Pei Xiu, right? Because he knows Pei Xiu, how famous he was, his relationship with Zongmi, with doctrinal studies. So I have here one quotation from his writing. He said, people nowadays, right? Usually people start with this, people nowadays, they refer to somebody. right? So here maybe Pei Xiu is one of them, right? Nowadays, people only want to attain great knowledge, right? Many different interpretations of the Dharma, and they seek extensively the meaning of texts, right? Pay attention to this kind of a keywords, right? Interpretation, texts, knowledge, right? They say that they are practicing, but they do not understand that great knowledge, right? So yes, you're reading texts, handling texts, looks like you're practicing, but not. Many interpretations will, on the contrary, form a barrier to enlightenment. It is like feeding a child great amounts of milk and yogurt while being completely unaware of whether or not he can digest it, right? So that's exactly the translation. This is translation from John McRae. All right. So that's one example. I took this as a implicit criticism of a group of people, right, in which Pei Xiu was one of them, right? And how about Pei Xiu, right? Let's go back, look at Pei Xiu. According to his own words, actually, he was more inclusive, right, in a way of viewing all the different Chan lineages. He was absolutely aware of the multiple diverse Chan transmissions communities. Zongmi did that as well, summarized very well at that time. At his time, there are multiple claims of Dharma transmissions. Pei Xiu, of course, knows that, and he wrote that in his preface to Pei Xiu, Zongmi's work, but he recognized everybody. Right? Huineng, of course, Shen Hui, that's one lineage, but Shen Xiu, like Northern School, Pei Xiu said, they all transmit Bodhidharma's mind, right? No problem, they have their own value. What they did is that they developed similar, dissimilar, different kind of responses to human beings, disposition and capacities, right? That's it, right? So no difference here. But however, the problem is, according to him, in the Chan community, we have this problem he called Tong Shao Ju Do, right? Tong means comprehensiveness, Ju means limitedness, right? So people really limited, right? Chan masters today in his time are limited, but lacking comprehensiveness. Right? This is what he says the authentic way. But really the authentic way should be comprehensive. Right? So that leading to something what he calls the gradual decline of Chan masters' pedagogy over the past decades. 数十年来师法易坏, right? So I think this somehow represents Pei Xiu's true thought. It's not exclusive, right? If you want to claim he's more exclusive, I think more evidence showing, right, he's more kind of favoring his teacher Zongmi's, right, view of the Chan lineages, right? Okay, let me see how much time do I have. Okay, so let me finish in a couple of minutes. Just one last agenda on the list I post in the beginning. As I said, I really focus on Pei Xiu, right? So I have a second part about this Dao-learner, Xuedaoren, right? Who they are. I don't believe I have a time for today, right? I mentioned 传心法要, right? If you read 传心法要 Wanling Lu, including Wanling Lu, you're going to find at least, right? I identify 14 references to this term called Dao-learners. Who are they, right? So that becomes interesting because it's not I created this term, right? One thing I want to clarify is that it's not me, right? I like this term, but people use that term. Also, I study much later Buddhism. People keep using this word, this term, Xuedaoren, right, to refer to a group of people, right? We don't know who they are, right? But it seems to be they have commonalities. They have shared characteristics, what they are, right? So my agenda is to kind of explore who they are, and I use Pei Xiu here as an example, right? But quickly, let's look at these references. I just took maybe one or two. Let's look at together. For example, this quotation, this is Huangbo Xiyun saying, once again nowadays, right? So he was really critical. Because you Dao-learners do not awake to this mind substance, you conjure up a false mind over the true mind, seeking Buddha outside yourself and retain attached to phenomenal appearance as cultivation, all of which are harmful, not at all the way to supreme knowledge. Right? So this is what he said, right? So the other side, I have more quotations, right? Maybe second one, if you look at the second one, here it says, if you Dao-learners wish to become Buddhists, right? So he was all saying the opposite of this group of people, right? Xuedaoren. You need study no doctrines whatsoever, but learn only how to avoid seeking for attaching yourself to anything, right? So if you adopt a contrarian kind of approach, right, understanding who is talking about those people, right, his audience, he's saying that his audience is all learning knowledge here without achieving the ultimate goal of becoming the Buddha, right? So maybe we can take this as Huangbo Xiyun's categorization of Dao-learners, right? These people, right? Xuedaoren, they're really just seeking knowledge, right? And we see from Pei Xiu, yeah, that's true, right? He got a lot from Zongmi, from himself, from his reading as well, right? Okay, so let me conclude with this kind of a very how to say preliminary characterization of this group of people, right? Maybe it's all wrong, but you can take this as hypothesis or as some kind of a unproved kind of a generalization, right? For example, what I feel just with very limited evidence here, these are unique group of beginners, right? So advanced, I would say advanced beginners, not necessarily monks and novices, right? They may be ordained. By the way, ordained monks, novices can be Dao-learners as well. Theoretically, they could have come from all walks of life in China. By the way, Pei Xiu represent more like aristocracy, but they could have come from commoners, not well-educated farmers, for example, merchants, right? But however, the commonality is that they all have developed the level of literacy. So they know how to read texts, although their level of literacy is very significantly, right? So they read texts, right? They are avid readers of spiritually charged texts, leading to compilation of various notes and anthologies, right? So this kind of anthology is quite popular in medieval China. So we are always wondering who are the authors, right? Could be eminent monks, but lots of them remain anonymous, right? So it could have been generated within this group, right? So sometimes lots of notes, right? They taken from their teachers, right? So that becomes an oral transmission, then that got to be transmitted, right? Got transmitted in the community, right? Some of them got edited, right? I said some in literacy level really varied in this group, right? Some are really bad, so you need edit, right? So then in Pei Xiu's case, religious reading was necessary for them to acquire knowledge about truth. By the way, they all read religious writings, right? They were eager consumers of commentaries. They really like commentaries on Buddhist scriptures and other anthologies of Buddhist teachings. Favor the type of work that were comprehensive in nature. Remember, Pei Xiu said he liked comprehensive rather than limitedness. Or in the all-in-one type of compilation. So really like the one book kind of a type. You have one book which has everything. So that's what they favor. So that they believe that's the shortcut access to the intricate Buddhist teaching, often situated at the edge of their social groups, right? Pei Xiu, of course, at the center of bureaucracy, but however, in his community, he was not popular. You can see the anecdotes, right? So some of the characterizations has been summarized in my paper, because I wrote a paper on the much later literati figure called Li Zhi. I can talk more about him. I wrote a paper already published. If you're interested in this concept and how they have been kind of developed or how people use that in the 17th century, maybe this is a case, right? But however, I do see the commonalities, some kind of continuities between him in the much later, in the early time and the Li Zhi in the later time, right? But this is something completely kind of out of today's topic, right? So I'm not going to elaborate that anymore. Just quickly, my conclusion, right, about Pei Xiu. Let's go back to Pei Xiu. And he's serious, right? One thing about it is he's serious pursuant of the way, right? In his own word, he never used this word Xuedaoren, right? But this word 求道者 appeared in his writing, right? He is serious kind of a follower of the way, right? And he's a pious as well. He was not only interested in doctrinal studies, but favored disciplined cultivation through learning, right? And the strong practical dimensions characterized by the concrete manifestation of these theoretical concepts in real world. One of my conclusion is no conversion, right? Basically, Pei Xiu is still Pei Xiu. He represents all the characteristics I listed here. There's no conversion here, no radical kind of a Pei Xiu away from his teaching, his teacher, Zongmi. He remained a Chan practitioner, by the way, right? But however, he favors a more gradual approach toward enlightenment, right? Okay, so that's all for today. So I want to stop sharing and return back to Professor Guo, right? So I think sorry for the little bit more time I spent on.
No problem.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. I believe in past 40 minutes, we all of us feel amazing about how rich of the source the Dr. Wu collect and present to us. And I believe this is spend a lot of time and energy to doing that. So now we are in the question and answer section. So anyone want to have a question to Dr. Wu, please. And if you want, you can just write on the chat, or you can just turn on your microphone and just speak up. Okay.
If there's nobody going, can I start?
Sure.
Hey, Mario, nice to see you here.
Thank you.
Well, nice to see you, and thank you for the wonderful presentation. If I may, just make a comment, comment and then kind of another suggestion that maybe kind of not necessarily a question, but the first one is more personal. The second one is more about the talk. About Pei Xiu, thank you. This is fascinating. Why you asked at the beginning why nobody have done this. I kind of really thank you, because this was something I had on my to-do list. I also started, so it kind of brought me back, and we are about the same age. So it brought me back in time, because I was more focused on Tang Buddhism and kind of for the most part didn't stray too much. But he's a fascinating figure, and this is a very valuable work and greatly appreciated. And now that you have done with your superior abilities and skills this, I guess I can cross this from my to-do list. I can do other things, but thank you. That was wonderful. In terms of the other part, well, I have a number of questions, but I don't want to monopolize. Just about the last part, the Xuedao or Xuedaoren.
Yes.
About using this kind of Dao-learners, again, you probably noticed rightly that it's a little bit awkward. But the term, I mean, I agree with everything, kind of your discussion was all wonderful, but that part, just if I can present slightly different take on this, Xuedao, actually, right now on my other screen, I'm reading a text, Tang Dynasty text from 9th century. And the first sentence, actually, I had it open on the screen as you were giving this. I'm discussing it tomorrow with my student, is Xuedao. The term appears there.
Yes.
And it appears many, many times.
Yes.
In Chan text, and maybe not just Chan text, but certainly I have mostly encountered in Chan text. Same with Xuedaoren. So Xuedaoren.
Yes.
So I'm not sure if it refers to a particular group. I mean, there might have been a community or something in the case of Pei Xiu, but the term itself, the way it's used, is basically along the lines of spiritual seeker or students of Buddhism or something along those lines. It have a very, very general meaning, and also it's very, very clear in some of the sermons. I kind of don't have time now to go back to my books to double check, but if I remember, for example, in Lineages, he's definitely speaking to a monastic audience in his monastery. So basically, and often is translated, actually Xuedaoren is translated as term kind of almost a synonym, you monks. But I think the general meaning, from what I have understood, and again, I might be wrong, is really more like to study Dao here, it's not like the Taoist Dao, or, I mean, it's a Chinese term, but basically to study the Dharma here, or to engage in, or maybe more broadly to engage in spiritual cultivation and reflection and study. And the person who does that is referred to as Xuedaoren, and primarily that's the job of monastics, but of course lay people like Pei Xiu also participate in there. Now, if there was a community, a sense of community around him, because there's some other individuals that kind of from the same period, contemporaries, I mean, Bai Jui will be one noted example. There are others that were also engaged and studied with some of the same teachers or had similar interests. And I don't know if you can establish a sense of community, but from what I can see, I don't see much evidence of community. So that's about it. Unless nobody have anything to say, then maybe I can ask some more. But again, thank you very much. Wonderful presentation.
Yeah. Thank you, Mario, for being here. You're definitely expert in this field, right? Better than I am. And you mentioned your book, by the way. You mentioned Pei Xiu as well a couple of times. Probably more with Gui Shan, right? His relationship with Huangbo Xiyun, with Zongmi, for example, Peter Gregory. Oh, by the way, if you study Zongmi or Huangbo Xiyun, you have to mention Pei Xiu, right? But Pei Xiu was never given a positive look. I mean, just look at Pei Xiu, right? Holistically, comprehensively, we understand this student, right? So that's something I try to just fill in the blank, right? So my job here is filling the blank. You guys already done amazing things about Chan Tang Dynasty, Chan Buddhism, but we have to think about Tang. It's part of Chinese Buddhism, right? So see if we can create a more kind of some categories we can use in early Chan history, and also can be applied to later Chan history as well, right? So a little bit, I encourage, like us, scholars for Chan Buddhism, we communicate more and try to be more theoretical, right? In a sense, categories are important, but sometimes we all know we study religion, lots of our concepts coming from the Western theory, right? So here we have a problem here. The Western categories will not fit here, right? So that encourages us we have to think from the sources, right? What the source really say, who they are. Although it's very awkward, I acknowledge it's awkward, but I don't want to lose the sense of the primary source. It's coming from the primary source, right? So that's something I try to do, although not very successfully, right? The second question, right? Let me respond in this way. You see here, what I identify Xuedaoren as something more specific than the passing reference to Xuedao or Xuedaoren. There are a lot, as you said, no problem. But did you encounter any case you can identify the place, right, the people, right, the time when this term has been used, right? So here, what I have is a place, right? It's a Gaoan, right? It's a Jiangxi, and it's a temple. We have a temple. We know Huangbo Xiyun was actually moved away from the mountain and moved into the city, right? So he was speaking to Pei Xiu, right? So that's very clear. So the Xuedaoren category appears in 14 times. So for any category terms, there may be kind of people mention this just without very specific meaning. You check dictionary, Chinese dictionary, it will give you this student of the way. It's nothing more special. But here we have the case that we have more specifics can be tied with this concept, right? So that's something I feel we need just to push a little bit more. For all those occasions when this term occurred, I think we can really look at it more closely. For example, Platform Sutra also mentioned this Xuedaoren, right? We know Platform Sutra use multiple different kind of appellations, terms for students. But however, this term appeared maybe 2 or 3 times, not many, right? Other Chan texts, that becomes somehow their favorite. They appear, Da Hui Zonggao, for example, he used a lot. But why not just say monks? Right? So if that's a monastic community, just say monks, right? But however, he was using that somehow consciously or unconsciously. I just want to know why, right? And in my case, in this case, I find it's really intriguing, right, about this reference 14 times, right? So that's probably not random. There's something there, right? Although my theory wasn't developed well, right? But maybe we can discover something else, right, along the way. And also this brings us to our attention to something we never noticed before, right? So we read all those texts. Sometimes we just preoccupied by our attention to teachers. We look at teachers, but right now, really seriously, we look at the students. Now the Pei Xiu, we know more about him, but in Chan texts, there's so many references to students, right? Who they are, right? Let's do something, find out who they are. See if we can give them a portrait, a picture. Maybe something else will come up. But for me, I'm right now try to follow this lead, right? See if anything will come up with that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. Dr. Renke?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that very interesting presentation. It's interesting to see that the conflict between those more intellectually minded and practical people is nothing new, but kind of exists throughout Buddhist history. I'm not working on, I'm working on contemporary Buddhism, but I have one question. You were mentioning that Pei Xiu is not just a student, but also a teacher in his own right. So what do we know about lay teachers in Chan history, especially like Tang Dynasty Chan history? In general, do we know a lot, or is there how to contextualize those?
Pei Xiu, I said he was a teacher because the legend says. I don't have evidence. For example, dynastic history never said he had a following, right? He has his own students. He transmits something, for example. No, we don't have that. But in the legends, they all said, for example, the legend I said in the island, he was a leader, right? He actually lived more than 100 years. So that obviously in the legends, he becomes the legendary leader. The evidence in Tang Good, I mentioned Xixia, it's really interesting. We have his portrait along with Zongmi. Zongmi is teacher. Then with Pei Xiu. Pei Xiu seems to be elevated. His status becomes somehow Zongmi's second-hand person, right? And we do have this text attributed to him, calling him a Chan master, but I don't have evidence. Another very interesting thing in the Tang Good text is that he was kind of grouped together with the White Cloud sect in the Hangzhou area. So we know this is very kind of a heterodoxical kind of a group in Hangzhou, right? They were involved in creating the Tang Good canon as well. So that they got into this Tang Good text as well. So that becomes really interesting. As I said, the Song dynasty is really crucial. If we can identify a following of Pei Xiu, most likely is in the Song dynasty. Another Chan figure probably is a better candidate for this. If you're looking at the lay teacher Pang Yun, right? Pang, Master Pang, layman Pang, probably is a more famous as a teacher. He has his own recorded sayings, for example, much more famous in the Chan community, more like a Chan master, although he was a layman, but he was more typical, right, as a lay Dharma preacher or teacher. Right? So,
thank you. Have anyone want to give the question? Dr. Wu, I have a kind of the question related to the Pei Xiu. Everyone and the student for Chinese Buddhism know Huicang prosecution.
Yes.
In the medieval time, it's a milestone, and they change all kind of the development of Chinese Buddhism. And we also know Pei Xiu is a high-profile political activist. During that moment, can you just share some, I don't know, it's a story or what the Pei Xiu position during that critical moment?
Okay.
And, can you share something for us?
He lived right in the middle, right? So he was actually the prime minister or grand counselor right after the persecution, right? So the Wuzong emperor died. The next emperor is the Xuanzong, called Li Chen. Li Chen actually, according to Chan legends, had a very close connection with Buddhist communities because he was put in exile in Hangzhou area. He knows Huangbo Xiyun, for example. Their legendary encounter between him and Huangbo Xiyun, of course, before he was enthroned as the next emperor. So there are lots of legends about this emperor, Xuanzong. I'm talking about Xuanzong. So Pei Xiu was chosen as the grand counselor, right, during the Xuanzong's reign for 5 years, right? So absolutely, he was right in the middle. He witnessed the transition, the changes, but however, in his writing, there's nothing more specific about it. But you can see his connections, right, with the Chan Buddhist, with Buddhism. That's all Chan Buddhism. That's all Chan Buddhism, and he helped revive lots of Chan monasteries. Guishan, when I mentioned Guishan, for example, the temple was attributed to him, Pei Xiu as well. So he was, yes, he was considered as instrumental to reviving Buddhism right after Huichang persecution. Right? So that's all we know. For more detailed information, from Pei Xiu's work, I didn't see that. And by the way, you should consult several wonderful Japanese studies. I mentioned there because he was such a prominent figure, prime minister, grand counselor. So he has been studied for political career, his political careers during the Tang Dynasty, right? Yeah, he was there. But not many specific kind of his effort, right, or his extensive descriptions about the destruction, for example. So I didn't see from his writings. I even didn't see his lament or remorse or kind of anything kind of complaining about that period. I don't recall any of that.
So sometimes I wonder if we see any Pei Xiu criticize about the Dao-learner. Do you think that thing is being created probably is pre-Huichang persecution? Maybe that is, I don't know, did Pei Xiu have anything talk about why the Huichang persecution and in the Buddhist community? What's wrong on that time?
Well, he was one of the top official in the court, right? Probably because his identity, you probably don't want to get yourself involved in criticizing the current government, right? Or even the previous emperor. So he is quite kind of refrained from getting too much into politics. So we didn't see he got involved, for example, factional kind of struggles. So we all know Tang politics was plagued by this kind of court struggles, but we didn't see anything involved Pei Xiu, right? Zongmi was involved in one of that, right? Monks was involved, but he was not involved. So that's probably his skillful maneuvering of his political career, right? So just be wise, right? Don't say too much. So we didn't see that anything kind of specific about bad policy, disaster of some of the policies. No. So I saw Dr. Louise Lancaster has a hand here. Maybe Lou wants to say a few words.
Oh, I do have a question. John, thank you so much for, as you talked, I began to realize just how very difficult it must have been for these people to be taught, to get information, to find a teacher, to get the data. It must have been extremely difficult. But what I'm interested in is that these compilations that resulted at that time, that became textual, I've never figured out how in the world to catalog them. These constructed textual types that we see, they are not identical in formation.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I've never been able to figure out how to identify a typology of any type. And that's just probably because I don't have enough background or information. But I wonder, from what you see, would you be able to identify the type of compilation which resulted from his work?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I can develop some hypotheses, right? Exactly following your lead, because we study Buddhist canon. Of course, we're very curious about the source of information. Actually, I wrote a longer version of my paper. I have that in my paper. But the anonymous reviewers, they don't like that, right? I mean, we talk about reading, writing. These are all technology, right? How to write, where to get information, like Buddhist canon. Pei Xiu mentioned Buddhist canon, right? They have Buddhist canon. We know this is Tang, Chang'an, capital, right? Zongmi, his temple, he resided in Zhongnan Mountain, which is right next to Chang'an. So he's a capital monk. What happened in Chang'an is that there are Buddhist canon being created, right? Ximing Temple, for example, we know there's a Buddhist canon, but however, most likely all in the hand-copied manuscript edition, right? If you remember the Dunhuang printed edition of Diamond Sutra. So printing was adopted at the time. But however, I doubt printed canon was widely available, but rather they all distributed or get accessed by manuscript. So only for a small group of people, they are privileged, mostly residing in capital. So then you have access to Buddhist canon, like Huayan, for example. Those Huayan texts, by the way, were translated just in Tang Dynasty. So they were new, right, at that time. But however, if you happen to reside in capital, then you have access. But however, if you think Huangbo Xiyun, he represents somebody very different from the capital monks. So their sphere of activities just regional. So they work in they were active in the mountain or in the region. You can't imagine they have a complete version of Buddhist canon. Even the Avantamsaka Sutra, like Huayan, there are 40 volumes edition or 80 volumes. So those are a lot. And then that caused some difference. The regional type of the Buddhists, they favor Chan Buddhism because they transcend literary words, but by implication, Buddhist canon. But however, people residing in capital like Zongmi and the Pei Xiu, they have access to all those texts anyway, right? So their writing, of course, is show up as a kind of anthology, a lot of references to scriptures. So then I think partially, yes, that's because technology, right? So if we have the printing technology being adopted, that's happening in the Song Dynasty. Actually, Buddhist canon were much more widely distributed in the texts as well, right? Down to the Ming Dynasty, that's even not a problem at all. So in every major Buddhist monastery, you can go there and check out Buddhist canon. So the sources, but however, for manuscript edition, the problem just like you said, typo, right? The variations, because each scribe, when they transcribe the text, they're going to create mistakes, introduce more typos, right? So that becomes a problem. And yeah, so far I can only identify those related kind of information from Pei Xiu's writing. His reference to Buddhist canon as a 5,000 fascicles or volumes, that matches Zhisheng's number. Like the standard Buddhist canon is 5,048 volumes. So Pei Xiu was already referring to Buddhist canon as 5,000, right? So that number actually becomes somehow standard during Pei Xiu's time, showing the notion of Buddhist canon, right? At least in the Mid-Tang Dynasty, right? In the capital city, Chang'an has become a well-known knowledge.
So I wonder if we if we look at the number of texts that are referred to by one of these compilations, can we look at that number and get some feeling for how the canon was used? That is, they never used all of it, that's obvious.
Mm-hmm.
They were all selective.
Yeah.
And so does the selectivity show up in the number of texts? And if we really begin to calculate that, would we find out that basically they may do with not so many texts after all?
Okay. Yes. Right now we shift our topic to Buddhist canon, right? So this is an extremely interesting question. And that's also what I'm wondering right now for Buddhist canon. What does a Buddhist canon actually exist, right? So Lou, your question asks exactly this kind of a crucial question, because if you look at each individual collection, they're not complete. There's no single complete collection, right? Maybe they exist at once, but quickly, if you check the catalog, there got to be something missing, right? So how can we still refer to Buddhist canon, right, as something complete or closed, right? So here, one of the question I have is, what's the relationship between the canon and the catalog, right? Actually, we're not talking, when Pei Xiu said Buddhist canon has 5,000 volumes, he has no reference to an actual physical existence of a canon. What he refers to is an impression or a notion created by a catalog, which is Zhisheng's 开源视角录. So here we're talking about actually the canon we're talking about is non-existence, right? It was created by the catalog. It's created by the catalog. And we know, for example, in much later time in Japan, Japanese will purchase the canon from China. Each time the canon arrived, they purchase it from Jiaxing. Jiaxing is close to Zhapu. Zhapu is the seaport facing Japan. So they always got the latest version of Buddhist canon from China. But each time it arrived in Japan, Japanese kept all the list of cargoes arrived in Japan, right? So no single canon is complete, right? And they all mixed up, right? There's something resembles a canon as we imagine. So that raises a very interesting question, the canon. Where is the canon, right? So it only exists in the catalog, right? Without the catalog, there's no canon. I don't know if you agree with me, right? But that sounds like that's a real picture.
I find that what you just said is very, strikes a note with me. I like that. And so I'd like to look at whatever monk you're talking about or studying. It would still be interesting to me to know what text did they actually quote from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we can still reconstruct. I mentioned Pei Xiu's Bodhisattva essay, and then we mentioned there's an English translation. Dhamma Mitra, this monk already, by the way, he's a monk from the 10,000 temple, the Wanfo Cheng, right? So he actually tried to trace all the quotations from Buddhist canon. So we can see here all the quotations, almost we can identify. It's coming from Avantamsaka Sutra, Surangama Sutra, we can find out. But however, of course, there are going to be variations. Sometimes missing characters or missing an entire sentence. So that happens. And so we don't know exactly which copy, right? He consulted, most likely a manuscript copy. Maybe that deficiency was created by the scribe, right? So the copy Pei Xiu had access. But however, the Buddhist canon, we all know they were edited later. So they find the best copy to collate, to correct. So right now, what we have in the Pei Xiu, for example, from the bibliographical perspective, that's maybe the perfect canon. But in reality, no canon, no text actually is perfect, right? If you're talking about a handwritten, each one is going to be different, right? So Pei Xiu, that's going to be a difficult task because we don't have anything physical left from Pei Xiu and his community. So that's going to be difficult to reconstruct. But I think if we read text carefully, so here is the thing, reading is our basic skill, research skill. Something got into information, got preserved in the transmitted texts, but in the very obscured, even distorted way. And we somehow, if we developed a sophisticated methodology, I think we can reconstruct by developing some categories, theories, for example. Of course, lots of them are speculations, but one way, if we have enough information, not coming from Pei Xiu, for example, I mentioned Huangbo Xiyun, there are other monks in his community, right? If we can do something else, try to discover, try to find out exactly what some of the category refers to, what kind of people, what kind of a shared characteristics they have. So maybe we're close to the reality, right? So what we're talking about is a probability, right? We do digital projects. We know what we do is kind of a proximity towards reality. It's not exactly what happened in the Tang Dynasty. Right?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And I believe for this 1.5 hour, we learn a lot from all the scholars talk about the issue, Dr. Lancaster, Dr. Wu, Dr. Pransky. So I hope everyone enjoyed this afternoon for this evening. And for our next activity for the Institute, September 9th, we have Dr. Jens Rinker's book talk. His new book, Mapping Modern Mahayana, and September 9th, 6 p.m. And we also invite everyone interested on modern Mahayana Buddhism, and please come to our lecture. And today we thank you and Dr. Wu to spend time for us, and all the people, all the scholars coming to attend this lecture. Thank you. And I wish everyone have a good afternoon. Okay, see you next time.